Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. You'll know from the title of this video that I'm going to be talking a little bit about a book called Sigil Witchery, A Witch's Guide to Crafting Magic Symbols by Laura Tempest Zakharoff. This is a book that I believe was published in 2018, but it is new to me. I just finished this book a couple of days ago, and so I thought while it was kind of fresh in my mind that I would pop on and make a video to share my thoughts about this book. It's not a very structured review. I just want to share some of the things that I liked about this book and a bit of what this book is about, what the book does, so that if it's one that you've been maybe interested in, you'll have a better idea of whether it's perhaps for you or not. And usually I really structure my reviews very carefully, but I will say that this one is kind of a bit different for me as far as a book review goes, because I really, really liked this book. I feel like when it comes to doing book reviews, I know that I can tend to not be the most overwhelmingly positive. And, I don't think that's a bad thing. But I always, when I have a lot of critiques, I want to make sure that I'm very organized and I get everything in a way that I feel good about. But this book, I really liked this book. So I just have lots of great things to say about it that I want to share with you. I will start off just with a, definition and some of Laura Tempest Zakharoff's words on what exactly Sigil Witchery and Sigil Magic are, and then I'll get more into kind of the structure of the book and some of the things that I liked about it, and at the end I'll show a little bit of my work working through some of the exercises in this book. So in the book, Laura Tempest Zakharoff writes that a sigil is a carved, drawn, or painted symbol that is believed to have magical properties. Magic is the art of focusing one's will or intent in order to bring about change. So sigil magic is creating specific symbols to influence a person, situation, or environment. And then she goes on to kind of talk about the distinction between the kinds of sigil work that are perhaps more associated with quote-unquote high magic and occult workings, and kind of explains that this is really not that book and not that kind of approach at all. And so she writes that the art of sigil witchery is much more organic and has a very humble, basic origins. And you can find its roots in the earliest preserved magic known to humanity, because at the heart of the sigil magic is the hand-drawn mark. And so she goes on a couple of sections later to say something that I really liked. And this is actually part of why I wanted to explore sigil making and potentially incorporate it into my practice, which I can say now that I definitely will be. It's not something I've done really much of before, but something that Zakharoff writes is that I think one of the best ways to think about sigil witchery is that it's essentially condensed spellcraft. It doesn't require a lot of space, special supplies, herbal knowledge, or a metaphysical degree. All you need to make a sigil is a surface, i.e. something to write on, a writing implement, and the ability to focus on a goal or desired outcome. Have a few minutes, a ballpoint pen, and a sticky note, you're golden. Of course, you can get much more elaborate if you want to. Want to make handmade paper infused with special herbs processed during a certain phase of the moon? Go for it. And she goes on, you can make sigil witchery as simple or as complex as your heart desires. And instinctively, sigils were something that I was drawn to and wanted to get a book about, kind of precisely for this reason, because it strikes me as a kind of practice that doesn't need a lot of stuff and doesn't need a lot of kind of apparatus built up around it, though, it certainly could have that. So I was happy that that was the approach in the book. And a little bit later on in the book, Laura Tempest Zakharoff writes that essentially whatever you can think of to do in regular spellcraft, you can do with sigils, and possibly more. Healing, banishing, binding, unbinding, cleansing, attracting, protecting, fertility, prosperity, love, friendship, partnership, glamour, divination, the list goes on and on. If you can think it, you can draw it. And so in terms of the method for sigil crafting that Zakharoff presents in the book, She makes clear and discusses this a little bit in more detail, which you could read if you want, that this is not the sigil crafting approach that folks may be more familiar with from the context of, for example, Spare's work and chaos magic. There's other methods of sigil crafting some may be familiar with that involve, having a word and taking certain letters out and making a design based on that. This is not that at all. And she discusses that method a little bit, but doesn't get into kind of the mechanics of that in this book. Instead, she presents 4 basic steps to sigil creation. The first is defining the goal or what you want to do with the sigil. The second is brainstorming a list of what is needed to accomplish that goal or solve that problem. And so, in the process of doing this, what you're really doing is kind of coming up with, you can think of it as kind of keywords that go with this purpose, right? The kinds of keywords that would go into a sigil for accomplishing that purpose, and some symbols that might symbolize those keywords. And then you design the sigil, this is step 3, based on the symbolic kind of components that you've come up with, right? That are the list of what you need to solve this issue. And then apply the sigil, acknowledge it. And she goes through lots of different ways that you can potentially do all of these different steps, right? And lots of different materials as well. So I'm going to be showing a little bit of what I've been working on just in pencil and paper, but she talks about everything from, potentially tattooing sigils on your body to making a sigil in seeds in the earth so that it sprouts in the pattern of the sigil, to perhaps drawing a sigil in water or salt water if it's something that you don't want to be visible or don't you can't maybe have visible all the time, to carrying a sigil written on a piece of paper in your wallet or on your desk, or incorporating sigil work into paintings and artwork, and just a whole host of different things that one could do with sigils, where one could incorporate sigils into other practices. So many ideas here. And she goes through all different kind of components of what one might need in order to get started with the sigil crafting. So she very much, and very clearly it comes through in the text, has a fine arts background. There's a really helpful section in the book that I much appreciated about different kinds of art supplies and what to kind of look for when you're looking for just pencils or pens or paper to be drawing sigils when you want to have a nice clean line. And she goes through kind of all different options for this with different price points, and different suggestions for what you can work with. But again, always with the understanding that you really could, work with probably things that you already have in your house. If you have, a couple sheets of printer paper and a pen, that's fine. I did end up actually following some of her shopping suggestions. I'll get to that in a minute. But one of there's a couple things that I really liked about this book. One is that I feel like I held myself back for quite some time from getting this book or for going in the direction of sigil craft, because I am someone who will very readily say that I cannot draw. And it's true. I can't draw a stick person even that looks good. I'm musical, but I'm not artistic in the visual, way. I certainly don't think of myself that way anyway. I've never been. I've certainly never done any art training or anything like that. But it's really approachable, this book and this method, for folks who self-profess that they can't draw. I think that you can still get a lot out of this book, and she's it's a very kind of supportive tone, and it's a kind of mix of, on the one hand, you don't need to be an incredible, skilled at drawing to be able to craft sigils in these kind of methods on the one hand, but then there's also a lot of kind of tips of how to get better at particular kind of basic skills in drawing that would be helpful for sigil crafting, like how to get better at drawing a circle that actually looks like a circle as opposed to like an egg, which is what mine usually look like. How to draw different kinds of shapes, and different kinds of stars, for example, like 5-pointed stars and 6-pointed stars, how to draw them well and have them look good. So that's really fantastic. There is a lot of ideas about different symbols in the book, wherein some ideas are given in terms of their associations, but you're also invited to write your own. So for example, here there's some crescents and some spirals there, and it goes to, dots and circles and squares and squiggles and arrows and all of these different components that could go into making up a sigil, with some different ideas about what they could mean that for me felt really intuitive, like the idea that a wavy line gives a sense of flow, gives a sense of movement, could represent water, could represent fluidity, rolling hills, snake-like motion, so on and so on and so on, and then room to put in your own meanings as well. We start with the dot, right? So in terms of approaching a new practice or process as somebody who doesn't feel good about their drawing skills, start with the dot was a really good place to start. The book reads for me as very inclusive. She has a lot of examples of different scenarios or goals where someone might design a sigil, or kind of as practice exercises in this book to work on things like, so-and-so comes to you and wants a sigil for this purpose, as ways of practicing, of course. First, you start by practicing drawing some symbols for basic concepts. So here there's some, drawing some symbols for words like manage or power or romance. You start to draw these symbols for yourself, and then you work up through the book to drawing actual sigils, right, with examples. And the examples felt really inclusive to me. There was, inclusion of, sigil crafting client backstories, who are members of the LGBT community, for example, or who, and so it felt really just kind of effortlessly inclusive, which I really, really appreciated. It felt like I could find myself in kind of the imagined sigil client examples, which I really, really liked. She also goes through some examples of artwork and symbolism from different cultural contexts, and in doing so, she does tackle the issue of cultural appropriation in a mindful way. It's not something that has, a whole chapter dedicated to it or anything like this, but she does, make a point of saying that it's important to note, this is a quote from Zach Groff, "I feel it's very important to note that I'm not showing you the following examples from symbol systems to say these are sigils or make stuff like this culture. I'm including them in order to demonstrate similarities in line, mark, shape, and usage between diverse cultures and time frames. You can appreciate the work without appropriating it." And she goes on to talk about, the importance of doing research and, perhaps finding some inspiration if there is a kind of cultural context or system that you're a part of, or have lineage in that is represented in the book. So I appreciated that approach to that as well. Lots and lots of pictures in the book, which is great. I did get, just for comparison, I got the ebook version of this as well. And I would say that, personally, if this is a book that appeals to you, that the hard copy, I would say, is worth the difference in cost between an ebook and the paper book, because there are a lot of places to write things in and practice drawing components of sigils or sigils for particular examples within the book itself. Of course, on the the ebook copy, you could just do that on a piece of paper, following the examples, but there's a lot of images in this book, as one would expect, and I personally liked having the hard copy the best. So I will just say as well, I'm sure other folks who have much stronger basis in sigil work will have reviewed this book. People with much stronger basis in sigil work than me. But I'm I'm always interested, with books like this, and this is why I make this contribution myself, to hear the experience of someone who is coming at a subject completely fresh. And so I would say that this book, if you're a person who is perhaps intrigued by the idea of sigil work or interested in the idea of sigils, that this book presents a method for starting to explore that and making sigils that requires really no prior knowledge or engagement with symbol crafting or sigil crafting in magical contexts at all. It really doesn't presume prior knowledge in any respect. She does include quite a significant, and I'm always looking for this, she includes quite a substantial bibliography and suggestions for further research, which has a number of subsections in it. So the bibliography has art, history, and culture books, general symbols and magic, a section on Austin Osman's Spare, and his work in chaos magic, which again, there's sigil crafting methods that are specifically associated with that. So she has a number of books here listed, and she notes that many of the books on Spare and his work are hard to find and are rather pricey, but there are excerpts of texts and some PDF resources you can find, and she lists the books there. Good starting places to explore other symbol systems. So here she has books on astrology, tarot, ohms, runes, and so on. A book on magical herbalism, or a couple of books on herbalism, and then a couple of books on witchcraft and paganism, and a couple of resources, on modern traditional witchcraft, which Laura Tempest Zakroff is a practitioner of. Includes, Margot Adler's Drawing Down the Moon for history. So there's lots and lots of resources to follow up on in here. And Zakroff includes complete footnotes, which I appreciate. I feel like in almost every book review I've done on this channel, I've been dissatisfied with the footnotes or the bibliography, because I think that they're really important, in terms of giving credit where credit's due, and also, giving some context and ways to follow up on different ideas. And that is done very well in this book. So the chapters are, just to conclude, and then I'll show you a little bit of my sigil work. Chapter 1, a brief history of mark making, and this goes kind of from ancient cave paintings up to, more contemporary examples. The meaning of the mark, and this is going through some different ideas around astrological symbols and letters and colors and directions and numbers, and symbol systems like this. There is a section, chapter 3, Making Magic, which is where some of the quotes that I've read come from. What is sigil witchery? What is magic? The step-by-step, 4-step process of making the sigil, and how to acknowledge the sigil, and so on. And some discussion of the way to do it, right? The way to make a sigil in this method. Then there's chapter 4, Design Guidance, which goes through some different drawing skills and good, tips and pointers, like don't erase everything that you draw. You'll make a mess. I've learned that. There are some practice exercises with scenarios, for you to draw different sigils for different clients for different purposes. And the paperback book is set up so that she does provide her own examples of what she would draw or has drawn for those scenarios, but they're in later pages, so you're not kind of peeking at it while you're trying to draw your own. And then there's a gallery at the end of some of Zakroff's artwork, her paintings, different sigils that she has drawn for different purposes, and to give an idea of what some of her sigils look like. Here are a couple. One is for a part of her business. This one here is for a part of her business, and this one here was a example of a sigil which is included in memory of someone that that the author knew and had created for them for particular purposes around creativity, fortune, inspiration, well-being, and working through anxiety. So these are some examples of the kinds of sigils that you could end up with this book. And so, by way of just showing where I'm at with my sigil work, I did buy some supplies inspired by the book. I took some notes and took those notes to the craft store. And I didn't get too much, and I didn't spend very much either. I wasn't, as I mentioned, I was interested in sigil crafting in part because it feels like a low cost but potent and powerful practice. And so I got a pencil sharpener and an eraser. The suggestions in the book included definitely getting the white eraser and the pencil sharpener that is not like an electric one, so that it doesn't rip apart the pencils. I got 2 pencils, 2H and 4H, so quite hard, that will make a quite sharp line, not so dark. I got 1 pen, which was the one that she suggested, which are these Micron pens. This is Micron 05 archival ink. The 05 refers to the thickness of the line, and so this is just a basic, that's upside down. This is just a basic pen. It was not expensive. It was a couple of dollars for inking over top of the pencil, and then you can erase the pencil afterwards. And then for making my drafts of the sigils in, I got a basic drawing paper, 50 sheets in a big paper, medium surface. Some of the tips were to make sure that something has drawing paper specifically, because you can get the different textures, right? You don't necessarily want something that is so textural like watercolor paper, because then when you're trying to draw clean lines, it won't come out straight. But medium weight drawing paper. I went, honestly, for this, I went based on cost. I didn't want to spend a whole bunch of money, but I did want something that was like physically large, because of course I anticipate making a lot of messy, crappy first drafts of things, because I'm not good at drawing at all. But I guess I will just show a couple here that I've been working on, maybe the least worst of the bunch. These are some of my drawings of some of the examples that were in the book. So this was my process, and you can see me writing there, coming up with the components of achieving what was being looked for, and you're given for each scenario a little paragraph describing the problem or the issue that the person is dealing with that they want a sigil for, and pulling out keywords from that paragraph, and some of the kind of keywords you might associate with the way that they want to feel, or what the outcome of that sigil that is desired, and coming up with small symbols to represent that. So you can see like a circle or a heart, and so on. And then working those into a design. So that's the very beginnings of some of the ideas that I was coming up with for some sigils. And again, these aren't sigils for my personal purposes. These are my drawings for practicing with the scenarios in the book. I plan to continue to work with this method of sigils for now. I am interested in exploring the chaos magic methods and reading some other methods for creating sigils as well, because I'm always just interested in learning different ways of doing the same thing. I'm curious about that. But this is a method that feels really natural to me, which I really like. Feels really potent to me, which I really like. So the next sigil that I plan on making for myself is actually for my 2021 day planner. I always, in the start of my planner, have always had, kind of a word of the year for the last couple of years. That's a kind of focus word. I know a lot of people do kind of a focus word of the year for each year, and I have one for 2021, and I will talk about that further in another video. But instead of just writing the word this time, I plan to craft a sigil around that focus word for 2021 and what I intend by it and what I desire working with that idea to bring about for me. So I'm going to be working on that, and maybe I'll share that sigil as I make it in another video with, a little bit of talking about my 2021 word. Anyway, so that's my brief, not so brief, 25 minutes overview of Laura Tempest Zakroff's book, Sigil Witchery. I hope this has been informative and potentially helpful if it's a book that you were deciding whether or not you might like to look at. I really liked it. I'm really glad that I got this book, and I'm definitely interested in exploring more about sigils. If you have any reading recommendations that you have really enjoyed for sigil work in particular, please do leave me a comment and let me know what your favorite sigil book is. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. See you later.